Hey everyone! Welcome back to Worldview and News.
Okay, so there's something really strange going on in Europe right now. On one hand, you keep hearing these whispers of peace, but on the other, the drums of war are getting louder and louder. Today, we're going to unpack this wild geopolitical paradox, and it all ties back to a leaked plan that could literally remake the entire continent. So, what is really happening here? Let's dive in. All right, just look at these two statements side by side. You've got Donald Trump's camp over here basically saying peace is just around the corner, we'll have a deal signed by Christmas. Then, on the other hand, you have NATO's Secretary General with a chilling warning. All of Europe must prepare for a war on a scale our grandparents witnessed. Peace by Christmas or a war not seen in generations? How can both of these things possibly be true at the same time? That's the huge question we need to answer. So let's start with those warnings of war because they are serious. NATO's Mark Rutte is being incredibly blunt here. He's telling European allies to get ready for war with Russia, and he's saying it is not a matter of if, but when. The fear is that other NATO countries could be Russia's next target in just a few years. And at the same time, you've got the UK's Armed Forces Minister saying Britain is now moving to a war footing. I mean, they're preparing the entire nation for a full-scale conflict. The message from the very top of European defense couldn't be clearer. Brace for impact. Okay, now let's flip to the other side of this paradox, the supposed peace plan. The draft basically has two huge parts. First, Ukraine would become a full member of the EU by 27. Second, and this is the absolute deal breaker, Ukraine would have to give up the territories that Russia currently controls. We're talking Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. This is the sticking point. The people pushing this deal say these concessions are totally non-negotiable, but for President Zelensky, formally signing away territory has always been a red line. So you can imagine how Europe is reacting to a deal about its security being negotiated pretty much without them at the table. It really boils down to three things. First, just pure frustration. One official reportedly said, "This is Europe's war, yet America negotiates without even asking us." Second, there's a deep distrust. European leaders have apparently told President Zelensky directly, "We don't trust Trump, be careful." But maybe the most telling part of all this is a moment of really blunt self-criticism, with leaders asking, "Why blame America? Blame yourselves for becoming so weak." And while all these negotiations are happening, the rhetoric against the European Union itself has gone into overdrive. I mean, we're seeing words like decaying, self-destructing, and even civilizational erasure being thrown around. But you have to understand, this isn't just random name-calling. It comes from a core belief that the EU is the main thing propping up Zelensky, the main thing preventing him from accepting the peace terms. So this war of words, it looks like a deliberate strategy to push the EU out of the way. And that rhetoric is actually part of a much bigger ideological play. The real goal here is to build a kind of united front of right-wing EU-skeptical movements all across Europe, a mirror image of the Make America Great Again movement. The whole idea is to target and support governments and parties in countries like the ones you see here, places that are already pretty critical of the European Union. But all that public talk was really just the tip of the iceberg, and this is where the story takes a really stunning turn. The well-respected journal Defense One reported on leaked, classified part of the U.S. national security strategy. And get this, the document allegedly outlines a deliberate plan for the breakup of the European Union, arguing that it's actually necessary for our national security. This suggests the whole anti-EU campaign isn't just talk, it might be official top-secret U.S. strategy. And this is what that strategy actually looks like in practice. It's been nicknamed the Mega Plan, Make Europe Great Again. The main objective is to convince a bloc of nations, think Austria, Hungary, Italy, Poland, to break away from the EU and instead align themselves directly with the United States. The sales pitch is all about sovereignty and protecting their national culture from EU rules. But there's one huge catch. These breakaway countries have to stay completely and totally pro-American. But that raises a massive question.
question, right? Why on earth would the US want to break up one of its oldest alliances? Well, it looks like the strategic thinking has completely changed. The EU is now seen as a potential rival in this new multipolar world. The analogy being used is that right now, the EU is like a snake without fangs or venom. It's got economic muscle, sure, but it's militarily dependent. The problem is it already has the venom glands, the tech, the money, the population. The fear is that if the EU ever truly militarizes, it stops being a client and becomes a real competitor, challenging American power. So this is the core calculation here. The assessment is that with its own tech and a unified army, which by the way could be set up in as little as 4 years, the EU would transform into a legitimate superpower. So the strategy is to stop that from ever happening. It's way easier to fracture the EU now while all its member states are weaker on their own than it would be to confront a unified European superpower down the road. It's a classic case of divide them now so you don't have to confront them later. And all this brings us right back to our paradox, and suddenly it's not a paradox at all. The peace talks and the warnings, they're not contradictory. They are two to the very same coin. That peace deal, it's basically a US exit strategy, a temporary ceasefire designed for a quick photo op that lets the US pull out. It's not built to last. And the war drums? Well, that's Europe waking up and realizing what comes next. They know the deal is flimsy and that once the US is gone, another conflict is almost guaranteed. They're getting ready to face it alone. So this leaves Europe at a truly historic crossroads with two completely different futures ahead of it. One is the path of integration, moving faster toward military and political unity to become its own independent global power. The other is the path of fragmentation, breaking apart into a bunch of weaker states caught between much larger powers. The alleged strategy seems designed to engineer a fragile peace right now, just to encourage that fragmentation and make sure a pure competitor never rises. Which leaves us with one final provocative thought. A fully independent, militarized Europe might be a challenge to the US, but for Europe itself, could it be the only path to survival?